Hi, my name is Nick Cosentino, and I'm a Principal Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. In this video interview, I got to sit down with Sophia Willows, who is the Head of Engineering at Rye. In our conversation, we got to dive into what it looks like to be an API developer in contrast to building just general software applications. And it's really interesting if you haven't had to work in this kind of environment before, because usually when we're developing applications, we get to own sort of all sides of things. If we have a back end and a front end, we need to change the API. Kind of sucks if we have to break backwards compatibility, but we control both of these things. However, if you're developing an API and all of your customers are developers, you have a very interesting scenario, and when it comes to breaking API changes, it becomes a bit more of a nightmare. I thought this conversation was really enlightening to have this different perspective from Sophia, and I think that you're really going to enjoy it. So sit back and let me know in the comments if you enjoy this kind of thing. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. If you want to go ahead, if you don't mind giving us a bit of a rundown for your career journey, like I said, you can start wherever you'd like. It's kind of funny sometimes people are like, I knew as soon as I was born I want to get into software, and other people are like, I had no idea until like it just happened.
Yeah. I'm somewhere in the middle. I didn't, intend to become a software engineer
Sure.
as a kid. I think like most kids, I sort of cycled through a few different dream jobs, but the one that was sort of the most consistently recurring was I really wanted to be an astronaut. Like I loved space. I had all
Awesome.
these books in my room, this big poster on my wall, like showing the solar system. Couldn't get enough of space and like this idea of like venturing out there and exploring. But there are height limits to be an astronaut. I'm like remarkably tall. Everybody's always very surprised by it, and it was looking like, oh, I might be over the threshold. In retrospect, I can tell you I'm actually under the threshold.
Interesting.
So I
I
was a
am
little overly
remarkably short, by
cautious.
the way, so that's kind of funny.
Ah, okay, so we balance each other
There we
out
go.
or something. Yeah. So yeah, in actuality, could have been an astronaut. I
Okay, yeah.
wasn't excluded based on height, but it was looking pretty unlikely. I mean, to be fair, like being based out of New Zealand, like it's probably hard to become an astronaut. We don't have like a space academy, and I'm sure there are like security clearance things that you need if you want to like go work at NASA, right? So it's probably for the best that I gave up on the astronaut dream. And so, astronautics did not work out. Had to figure out, okay, I can't be an astronaut. What boring thing am I going to do with my life
Because
for
anything else
60
is going to be
years?
boring, right? Like that's compared to an astronaut. So
I mean, yeah, nothing's going to compare.
before we continue on, this is just a quick reminder that I do have courses available on DomeTrain. If you're just getting started in your programming journey and you want to learn C#, you can head over to DomeTrain. I have a Getting Started in C# course. It's approximately 5 hours of content taking you from absolutely no experience to being able to program in C#. And after that, I have my Deep Dive course, which will take you to the next level with another 6 hours of content so that you can start building basic applications. Head over to DomeTrain and check it out. Let's head back to the video.
My stepdad like worked with computers and I was into video games and all this kind of stuff. And so got into computers through him. Like, we played around with like this like DOS computer. And yeah, been on the path to becoming a software engineer ever since. This is my villain origin story. So, I think like for the most part, like up until like maybe 3/4 of the way through university, like pretty typical story. Went to high school, graduated early, got some scholarships, went to uni, and it was like my second to last year when I was taking like an industry project paper. It's compulsory for the software engineering degree, and they gave me a big list of like 20 projects, and you had to stack rank your top 10 and you get given them. There was like this little local startup called Quotamation that I put as like my rank 9 project. And of course, I got given this project I didn't want to work on. Right? This is how it works out.
Yes,
I was
yes.
bitterly disappointed because I wanted to work on this cool like computer vision project for detecting like cancerous lesions. But yeah, I got this local startup, and it actually turned out to be like the greatest accident of my life because a month or two into this project, I got hired on as like their founding engineer. Learned a lot. I was there for a few years before we wound up running out of money. Ended up working at a place called Crimson Education, which is like this big college admissions consultancy firm. And whenever I tell people I was a software engineer there, they are shocked because they don't realize that like this, college admissions consulting firm has an engineering team in the first place, but they
Okay.
do. They have a very large one. There's this big in-house tech platform for managing student data, and recently like a bunch of like recommendation engines and things like this, AI tools which like consume the student data and produce insights on like a student's candidacy or recommend ways they can boost their candidacy.
Oh, awesome.
So I was there for a while, like leading a team at Crimson Global Academy, which is like the online high school part of Crimson. Ended up running the AI team at like the core like college admissions consulting business, last year. And then at the start of this year, I changed job. I'm now working at Rye as their head of engineering, running the engineering team, and we're building developer tools for online commerce, which is a dream job for me because I have this huge passion for developer experience and developer productivity and like building really beautiful, elegant, easy to use APIs, writing a lot of documentation. I love documentation. I'm in that phase of my career, I guess. Um, and, historically, I haven't been able to get as deep into these things as I want to because it's always been like a, a product company, right? We're building like a SaaS product for a business, or we're building, a consumer app for a student or something like this. And at Rye, we are building an API. We ship our API. And so just like you would have like a user experience expert telling you how to build your sign up form for like your social media app so that grandma can make an account and start posting. We need developer experience experts at Rye to make sure that our API is sort of, thoughtfully designed and easy to use for people outside of the company who might not have as much sort of context and understanding as us. So that's a little bit about me and how I got to where I am. Yeah.
That's awesome. I have I guess a question about the journey. It sounds like going from being, I guess, like an IC, right, to being able to leading engineering teams. Like what did that transition look like? Was it kind of like a fell into it, or was it like very planned? Like what did that look like?
Um, Yeah, it's a good question. It wasn't super planned. I sort of had like this vague notion in my head at one point that like, oh, you should become a manager to progress in your career and
Sure.
like reach that next level. And then after a year or two after that, I sort of had a mindset shift. Management and people leadership is not a promotion. It's a totally different sort of career track.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, and I have firsthand experience of how true this is. Like when I first sort of took up the team lead role at Crimson, I'm a researcher, right? Like I'm always Googling and trying to figure out things like ahead of time, huge planner. And I was Googling, how do I be a good manager? And every single thing that you run into on the internet will tell you like, hey, there is no amount of research you can do that will adequately prepare you for this. Like you are going to be horrible at this job for like at least a year's time. And
Sounds
it's
about
going to
right.
be a huge mindset shift and very challenging. And I sort of read this and thought, well, I'm pretty smart. I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue. And it was very, very challenging. So when people say it's like a parallel track and like it's not a promotion, like this is very true. It's like very different skill set. Like you're not directly extending the things that you had become an expert on as an
Right.
IC. Obviously, like at some companies, like this thing about it being parallel tracks is like kind of less true, right? Like there are some companies where you do just like legitimately sort of cap out at like senior level as an IC, and there's no real progression beyond that. But I would say like most technology or software companies that you'd want to work at and are sort of high performing will have this understanding that, like, hey, there is sort of this group of like top performing ICs that need to progress and be given more scope and responsibility over our technology. And the correct way of leveraging these people may not necessarily be giving them people responsibility, because they're either not interested in it, which is the case for a lot of like people I know, or maybe they have an interest but they don't have the aptitude, and they're better off like focusing in on like the technical side of things. So yeah, not planned, kind of fell into it. When I joined Crimson, I had joined as like a senior software engineer, and like that was what I was quite happy with.
Right.
So Crimson doesn't have like staff plus levels, and it was literally like my third day. I had my first one-on-one with the VP of engineering, and up until this point, like Crimson had been very flat. Like it was, everybody in technology reported directly to the VP. And yeah, my third day, he was like, "Hey, by the way, we're looking to, introduce team leads. Like, I'm sick of having, 40 direct reports. It's
That would be a
impossible."
lot. Yeah.
It's a lot. Like, Guy's calendar was like genuinely depressing. Like, every time I looked at it, I was just like, "Man, I'm glad I'm not that guy." Uh, it's a lot. And so yeah, it was like totally accidental, right? Like I didn't explicitly join the company with the intention of like making this switch, and I had to think about it for a little bit when the opportunity had been presented to myself. Like, okay, do I really want to do this? Like, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and then so now like leading engineering is your current role. Like, is that more of a sort of like a technology fit, or does that also include like leading the people in engineering as well?
Yeah, good question. It's like predominantly technical. Like I think HR and people responsibilities are kind of split a little bit. Like we have an operations team that handles like a lot of the HR responsibilities. Like I'm not approving like leave requests or
Sure.
anything.
Okay. Yeah.
And then like people management in terms of like giving feedback and things like this. It's kind of like partitioned between me and the CTO.
Okay.
And the bulk of what I do is kind of like execution oriented, like making sure that the trains run on time, so to speak.
Yep.
Things are getting out the door, and people are not blocked, and people are able to succeed, and we're sort of making good like technical decisions for the growth of the company.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I like asking a little bit about these kinds of things because as people watch and listen, I guess depending on the information they're gathering from different sources, they might have a very cookie cutter idea of like, okay, there is developer, there's senior developer,
Mm-hmm.
then there's staff principal, okay, then there is PM, then there is engineering manager
Mm.
roles, then there are like it's very just like clear cut, and I think the reality is like it's just not the case, right? There's a lot of common things you'll see, but
Mm.
there's also differences. So when you're describing a role, I was just curious, like, yeah, what does that look like? Because other people maybe they have seen roles like this, maybe they haven't, and the context is kind of interesting. So
Mm. Yeah, it's like it's super variable between companies, and like titles are just not transferable at all. Like you always need to dig into like, okay, well, what did you actually do?
right,
Especially I think like there's a lot of title inflation, right? So we have a lot of like senior engineers who are in like for a year or two, and like there are some like extreme outliers who like reach that point very quickly, and they just are like very naturally gifted. But like I'd say most of the time it's an example of title inflation. So yeah,
yeah,
it's
I'm the
important to
senior
dig into
executive VP chief of engineering. Yeah,
yeah, with like one
development.
person co-working with them, right?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
I mean
especially
it is what it is, but yeah, it's
mm,
I totally get the title inflation part. It's a thing.
yeah.
Awesome. No, that's cool. It's definitely an interesting journey. It sounds like smaller companies for the most part, though. Like in terms of the engineering part, or was you mentioned the school one maybe was a little bit bigger?
Yeah, Crimson's a little bigger. Oh, it's like big in terms of New Zealand, right? So I
Okay.
think like we capped out like sort of just under 30 engineers, which
Okay.
is
Yeah.
like tiny in US terms.
Sure. Yeah, but it's
But
not like a
yeah,
couple of people
yeah,
in a in an office, it's yeah, got a little bit more, but
Yeah,
that's cool.
exactly. Like there were lots of time zones to manage, and it's like a big sort of global company, and engineering is like one piece of it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So, okay, as you kind of transition into this role, though, you had mentioned that like your focus and something that you're passionate about is developer experience. So, I think this is unique because, and I like that you were kind of able to touch on this a little bit through the career journey, but I I don't know, for a lot of people, they might not realize as they're going through their engineering journey, like you might be in roles where you're literally building end user products, right? Like
Hmm.
you're shipping mobile applications or you're building websites or like it's literally something that you're going to have consumers interacting with. And that's, one sort of mindset when you're building things. But as you're describing as well, like in your case, your end users are developers, right? There are other people that are
Hmm.
building on top of these things. So um, I'm curious from your perspective, like what's the thing that that you like? Because you mentioned like you really like that, right? Like what kind of makes that stand out for you that's different?
Yeah, like the big thing that's different is like, at Rye, like because we're selling an API to developers, we don't directly sell the API, but the API is monetized, right? It's
Sure.
our product, it's what we lead with, it's what we want people using. Um, our engineering department is, functions like a profit center, right? Um, at and this was true like at the New Zealand startup I worked at. Like we were selling like a product to end consumers. It wasn't true at Crimson where engineering was really like an enabler for our service departments helping students out. Like I think it's increasingly true that um, engineering as a profit center as like more sort of product lines get built. But for the most part, like most of my tenure there, like it was very much a cost center, right? And I think like the thing that's different for between Rye and those other two companies is, one, we're a profit center, like Quotamation, the local New Zealand startup, and two, like we're not selling like a UI, right? So when you're selling this consumer product to people, like they really could not care less about what it looks like under the hood, just so long as like the product sort of meets their requirements and suits their needs. And historically, it's been true that capital has been very cheap to raise, and so I think a lot of like engineering leadership has erred on the side of like, well, we can take on a lot of tech debt, and our code base can be a little messy, and it's fine because it's going to be very easy to, assuming we get a little bit of growth out of it, it's going to be very easy for us to do another capital raise and like expand the team, and
Mhm.
we can sort of just like scale our way out of like these constraints imposed on us by technical debt.
Sure.
It's a little different today. Like that doesn't quite work because raising is hard. And at Rye, like we're kind of in this environment where we know that we have a great product and like we can easily raise, but like would it be on favorable terms? Like it's unclear.
Right.
Maybe in a year or two. And we also know that uh, a key success criteria for us is the developer experience. Like people actually do care about what our thing looks like under the hood because
Right.
they are directly integrating with it, like programmatically, right? So in exactly the same way that like, you might have like a one-on-one with like a report and they complain to you about how spaghettified your code base is and how impossible it is to work on sort of the project they've been assigned to lead.
Mhm.
We potentially can have those exact same discussions with our end customers where they will
Right.
tell us like, hey, this API endpoint is like really hard to use, like it's making it really hard for us to like build our integration on top of you guys. uh, and we'll get some feedback and iterate there. It's not something that we can paper over like you can when you're just shipping a UI. Like the underlying API, the underlying implementation can be as horrible as you'd like, so long as you can put a nice like coat of paint on top,
Right.
it all works out. But like at Rye, it's fundamentally different. So we have sort of like economic constraints which force us to sort of be a lot more intentional about incurring technical debt and a lot more like strategic and long-term oriented. And then the other thing is like we don't have this nice like UI abstraction layer in between us and our end customer. Our end customers are directly interfacing with whatever we ship. And yeah, sure, like you can cut a V2 API, but like forcing people to move from V1 to V2 is like impossible. It's
Right.
hard to do internally in an engineering organization. It's impossible to do when you have like people outside of your company who already have an integration that's it's already working for them. So and so that also puts a lot of constraint on us. Like we need to think very, very carefully about our public APIs and like what we're shipping and like, is this the right abstraction? Have we gone too far? Have we not gone far enough? Like, what's the story for evolving this thing over time? Like, have we sort of boxed ourselves into a corner? Can we build more sort of affordances into the schema so that we have flexibility in future if things change? Like, these are front of mind at Rye in a way that they just haven't really been at past companies.
Yeah, that's super interesting, right? Because like I think probably something that will resonate with many people is like if you're thinking about a typical web stack, right? You have some back end that has APIs you're calling, and you have a front end that's going to be calling those things. And yeah, of course, like when you're versioning APIs and stuff, like that's a bit of a pain in the butt for sure. Like we're not all fans of doing it, but at least if you own both sides of it, you can go do that, right? You're like, okay, we'll have a plan, we'll introduce a V2, we'll migrate over to it over time, and you get there. And but
Yep.
in the situation you're describing, it's so true. It's like, how are you going to convince all of your users who are paying money, they're happily using V1, let's say,
Mm.
and they're going, what do you mean we have to go do more work to change that, like how we're doing things? Like we're paying you, like we're not doing more work on this, right? So uh,
Yeah, and you know, there's a really interesting case study actually, or something that sort of this makes me think of. I forget the guy's name, but he used to work at Stripe, and he's got a blog post about the Postgres text data type. And so text is different from varchar. Like if you have a varchar column, it's constrained to a particular maximum length. Text is unbounded, and so you might think like, oh, this is a great data type to be using. I don't need to think up front about like the size of my database columns. But he kind of mentions that like when they're building Stripe, and you know, Stripe in many ways is very similar to Rye. It's an API company.
mhm.
Have a lot of these sort of developer experience constraints that we have. Stripe used a lot of text columns like back in the early days, and what they discovered was people were stuffing like super long like JSON objects in stringified form into like name fields in their API to like, you know, as a sort of metadata store. Um, and it was slowing things down. They had these huge text blobs in their database, and so Stripe decided to do the a very reasonable thing, which is like, okay, we'll put some caps in place on these fields, and we'll reject anything longer than 255 characters. And that sounds very easy until you realize like Stripe was very deep into their uh, um, company at this point. They had a ton of integrations. A lot of developers are depending on this
Yeah.
behavior that they can just send, a giant 2 megabyte JSON string and it works. And so, there's this blog post sort of talks about like how they managed this. They had to find like all the developers who were relying on this and like communicate with them. Some people they just could not manage to reach and like get them to upgrade, and so they have like a hard-coded list of like, okay, these users they get to send giant payloads, and
Oh,
everyone
no way.
else and everyone else is stuck as constrained to like 5,000 characters or something. And that's the kind of thing you need to do, right? Like it's very difficult to sell to your customers like, hey, we're going to break your integration, because again, like they don't care that like you're running into like operational problems with your database, right? Like this is
It's
not
not their
their
problem, right?
concern. It's not their
Shouldn't be.
problem. No, exactly. And you know, this is a really great example of how like something really minor, like, oh, okay, like what data type, you know, do we pick like a varchar or text column, which is like totally uncontroversial when you're just building like a consumer web app. Like you own both sides of the stack. Like this is never going to be an issue. You can always
Yep.
just pick a text and be fine. When you're shipping an API to external developers, like totally different story. And there's this thing called Hiram's law, which sort of states that, like, you know, when you with a sufficient number of users of an API, doesn't matter what you're promising in your contract, like all observable behaviors of your system will be depended on by someone. And you know, a text field where you can send, you know, a 2 megabyte JSON payload is something that you probably don't advertise in your contract, but it's an observable behavior, and someone's probably going to try to do it at some point. And once someone has done it, like it's sort of de facto become part of your contract. Like someone depends on it, and it's
Right.
very much a breaking change to fix that, even if it feels like an oversight from your perspective as the API builder.
But it's such a good point though, right? Because like as you said, like once someone does it, now literally that's at least one person that depends on this as functionality. There was nothing that said they couldn't. They were literally able to do it, and they go, great, now I depend on it. So I mean,
Mhm.
if it's early and you happen to notice it and you're willing to say like, no, we're not putting up with that, sure, but that's a tough conversation, and odds are it's not something that you observe right away. It's something that
Mhm.
over time, especially if you're someone like Stripe, all
Yeah.
these users onboarding, all of the like building APIs over years, then all of a sudden you're like,
Mhm.
I guess it isn't all of a sudden, right? It's you reach a point where you're going, wait a second, what's going on
Yeah,
here?
you
And then
gotta
it's
fix
like, oh
this.
crap.
Yeah, and the other thing to touch on too is like the other similarity between Rye and Stripe is like, you know, like what are people depending on us for, right? So like people integrate with Stripe to add payments to their application. At Rye, we build like this commerce API. You can, you know, build a social marketplace or a link in bio app and like sell products from any Shopify or Amazon store on the internet.
Mhm.
So you integrate with us, you embed commerce into your application. Like payments and selling products, like these are for a lot of companies like the most important part of their business,
Yep.
okay? Because, you know, with Stripe you're directly capturing payments from an end user, like revenue is pretty important. With Rye you're earning commissions generally on the things you're selling through our API. Like again, like it's you know, this is where you make your money. And so
People care about
it's
that, right?
not like, yeah, people care about this. It's not like we are shipping, you know, like some kind of like managed chat room as a service thing where, okay, we have a little bit of downtime and people are upset because their chat experience broke for a little bit. Like this is like we go down or we break someone's integration because we ship a breaking change,
Their business stops. Like,
and their business, yeah, their business grinds to a halt, right? Like they're not making money anymore. It's a huge problem. So these things are just, you know, it's elevated to that next level because of like the nature of the product that we're giving people and like where we sit in their business.
yeah, that's a like yeah, I wanted to say like, hey, yeah, like no pressure, right? Like it's pretty important. So that's definitely challenging. That's cool though. So it's I kind of mentioned as I was thinking about the like the developer experience part, like building APIs, I kind of touched on like, okay, yeah, like you could be building consumer products. And I guess the other thing that I didn't really draw the distinction before, but the work that I've been doing recently is more around like platforms. And I
Mm,
guess this is technically different from a platform. So when I'm saying platform, I'm thinking like I used to manage deployment teams. So deployment was the platform. Now I'm managing teams that work on routing infrastructure. So we have routing as a platform for different services. But in this case, it's still like a product, but the sort of like the service area of the product just looks very different. How it's packaged is not. It's not something that users are clicking through like and having a visual experience and stuff like
mm,
that. So yeah, I guess that ends up being in my head. I'm like, I guess it's like a third classification of things. Like, so I just hadn't really kind of pieced it together that way, but
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
probably have a like similar types of interactions, I guess, though. And this is the I was kind of curious about this part, right, from like a engineering or developer experience perspective. For us as a platform team, like serving other internal service owners, we're in this position where our like we have true end user customers, like literally people that are using Microsoft products are the end users, but a lot of the time we're thinking about our users as the other service owners, and
Hmm.
those are other engineering teams. They have their own engineering constraints. They're building services, and I feel like there's probably a lot of similarity there to the work that
Yeah.
you're doing, where like you're working with other engineers. Is that like, would you
Mm.
say that's a similar thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of overlap here, right? Like we're both serving developers, like it's a technical audience, like they care about the interfaces you're shipping. The main difference that I would sort of draw here is like, you know, different sort of your different teams in the same like overarching like organization, right? The incentives are somewhat, although not entirely perfectly aligned,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and there's sort of like this uh, uh, organizational structure you can leverage to like try and force people to move off of like
Right.
an old API. And I think like this context that you're talking about, like platform engineering, like this feels to me like where a lot of the developer experience, like conversation and tooling, like centers around. Like there's a tool that I've been looking at. It's like quite literally called DX. And like they have this thing called like DevX 360, and they pitch it as like quantify internal developer experience. And I think that term internal is very, very important. Like, I think there's kind of like two flavors of developer experience. Like, you've
Okay.
got internal developer experience, which is where a lot of the conversation centers around. This is like platform teams servicing sort of product teams, or product teams concerned about like the code quality of like their product that they own end to end. And then you've kind of got this, external developer experience concern where you are sort of like this island, and you've got a bunch of other developers on other islands trying to interface with your system. And the tooling and the metrics and the sort of organizational leverage you have in these two different sort of camps, there's a lot of like overlap, but it's also like very different.
Yeah. I like that. The concept of like that, like you sort of your organizational influence, right? I think is a really key point, because
Mm.
I'm trying to think about my current situation, and you're totally right that in our org, so I work in M365, so
Mm.
like the Office 365 product
Gotcha.
suite. If we had to, we had some mandate from leadership, we have to move in some direction, and we go, okay, we're going to design for this, we would have like support from, other teams might be, not totally happy with us if we had to pivot and do something, but we'd be able to rally behind it,
Mm.
get buy-in and get people to move. And I've seen like from other teams, I've seen this kind of thing happen where we're all kind of like, oh man, like that's going to be extra work, but we're like, we get like why it has to happen, like we'll figure out how to schedule it. Like we're
Mm.
going to help you get there. But yeah, it's like it's not great, but we can all align to it because we're in the same org, because we have these common business goals. But when you start to lose that, like I'm just like I said, I'm trying to picture this situation where we have a team coming to us and saying, look, like we're switching things, and we know you use this, you're a heavy user of this, but the way forward is this, and we're planning to deprecate in this time frame. If they weren't in our org, I can't even imagine what our response would be like. Like, you're joking, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're absolutely
Hmm.
not doing that.
Yeah, totally. That's yeah, exactly. That's this is our lived experience at Rye. Like this happens. Yeah.
Right. No, that's do you find like, are there situations where you, at least in your experience, where you've had to do that, where you've had to basically say like, we are going to a, V next, and like, and you have to come up with the pitch to them? And is it kind of like a, if that is the case, is it like a common message where you're like, look, it's because of some internal changes we had to make, or like how do you kind of frame that to users so that they're like, okay, like we're not happy but we can get behind it, or like what does that even look like to move forward?
Yeah, totally. So, just like as a backdrop, like we try to avoid
Of course.
breaking changes wherever possible. We try not to make a habit of it, and we always ask ourselves like, okay, like, if we have had to make some breaking changes, and we always ask like, afterwards, like, okay, how could we have avoided this? Was this
Sure.
predictable in some way?
Got to learn from it in
Um,
some capacity, or try to, right?
yeah, exactly. But to answer your question, like the thing is to always sort of focus on value and like the reason why we're making these changes. So
Mm.
a lot of our breaking changes come in the form of like schema updates
Okay.
because like we modeled the underlying world like a little bit and accurately, and like we need to change a type, or we need to get rid of a field or something like this. And the way that I sort of push the team to frame this is like, it's not just that we are going to send these guys a message saying like, hey, by the way, the type of this field is changing, 2 weeks from now, please update. This is a horrible message to receive
Right. That
as
might be the
a as a
reality,
as an
but
end. Yeah, like like this is reality. This is what we did from like a technical perspective, and yes, this is absolutely what they must do in order to sort of get over this hurdle. Like this is all accurate, but if you're on the receiving end of this message, like you start asking questions like, well, okay, well, why are you guys breaking my integration? Like this is busy work, right? Like you said, like we're not going to do this.
we got other stuff to
Um,
do. Like that's the last thing we want to go focus on now that we already got it working.
Yeah, exactly. So, like when we make these changes, so like one that comes to mind, which is like somewhat minor, is we have like a product API. You can get information about products, and we expose like the weight of the product.
Hmm.
And initially, this was modeled as an integer. Turns out that weights can be floating point numbers.
Sure.
We made a mistake, 2 years ago when this API was first introduced, and like we'd been very lucky up until about 6 months ago. And so we had to change it to a float, which for something like JavaScript is fine, but for a language like Go is not so fine if someone's deserializing it as an integer. And so like we communicated like, hey, the type of this is changing. It's a breaking change depending on for some sort of tech stacks. And this is what you need to do. It's relatively easy lift. There's no major migration here. And the reason why we're doing this is because we, are giving you more accurate information, because weight is actually somewhat important if you are, one of our customers has sort of like a warehousing business where people from outside of the US can order product, ship it to their warehouse, and then have it forwarded on. And so weight is very important for them because they need to know like this information in order
Mhm.
to optimize their logistics for getting things out of the US.
Right.
Uh,
And if
and
they
so
don't have that
having very
resolution,
accurate,
it's like
yeah, having very accurate weight information, like, okay, sure, it's like just some floating point error, it's like a half a kilogram here and there, but like it adds up over the course of like a full sort of shipping crate, right? So we need to make this change. We need to be accurate, and the trick is to focus on like, okay, like what awesome things are we enabling? What new use cases are we making possible? Like, what can you now do with our API that you couldn't do previously, or what can you do better now that you couldn't do quite so well previously? And that kind of gives people like a carrot for like, okay, I'm going to make this change. Sometimes it's very minor, like, I'm going to change a type. Sometimes it's a bit more major. Like I think, like maybe we've realized that, hey, this API call, up until now, it's been synchronous. We give a response immediately, but actually, it turns out that uh, our P99 latency here is super high. Like we need this to be async. This is a larger engineering lift on our customers' end. But the key is always like, yeah, sure, there's like a technical reality, like what technically did we change and what does the engineering team need to do? But just receiving that on its own is like a really hard blow, and people are not motivated by hearing like what has technically changed. They need to know like, okay, what am I getting out of this? Like, why is Rye putting me through this pain of, fitting this thing onto my roadmap? I don't really want to do it. Like, what's the carrot at the end? And the idea that like, oh, I'll do this and my integration continues working as is with like no net change is not a suitable carrot. This does not motivate people. The idea that like, oh, I must do it or I'll break.
Yeah, just to keep things going, I guess I'll do the work. Like that's a pretty bad motivator.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting as you're explaining this because you're obviously describing your user base as like they're obviously technical, right? They're calling an API, they're developers, they have to work through this. But even though internally you have technical reasons for making changes and you have to explain technically how an API is going to change, it's still very interesting to me that the reality is the end users here, they don't care about the technical reason why. So they care about technically what they have to do to adjust, but they don't care about the like truly behind the scenes. They're like the reason that you had to do that, that's not our problem. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think like communication and software engineering is like it's like an undervalued thing, and what you just explained I think was so important, because if you are hyper focused on just writing code and like stereotypical kind of programming mindset, which I'm not blaming anyone for doing, because I just think that a lot of us think that way, and we have to work hard at kind of stepping back from that. But the sort of stereotypical programmer will say, well, this is the reason why, like this is the technical reason, that's what we have to say. But you have to remember you always have to think about your audience. In this case, your audience is your end user, right? But when you're communicating ideas, like you have to explain things in a way that people are going to understand and they're going to care about. In this case, you want to be able to persuade people. It's like like you said, here's the carrot, the motivator for it. So kind of dropping the internal technical reason why, like, again, not our problem that you had to make a schema change internally. That's not our problem. But now you flip the whole thing around and you can focus on value. You can say, like, these are things that you will care about. Like, this will be a motivator for you.
Yeah, totally. And, like this extends to all of our communication with our sort of developers. Like if you were to look at the Rye changelog, like we don't just focus on value when we're talking about breaking changes. Like we also add this little bit of flavor text to things like new feature releases. Like so. Recently in July, like we added a webhook we fire for when Amazon orders have their sort of delivery delayed, right? Okay. And there's a way of writing a changelog here where we put a bullet point in and say, hey, we have this new webhook, and full stop. On to the next bullet point.
Webhook, done, next. Yeah.
Done, next. I can imagine the conventional commit message, right? Like feat add order delivery delayed webhook for Amazon orders, and you just automatically generate that changelog, right? But we always want to go a step further, and if you look at our changelog, you will see that we have a couple of follow-on sentences explaining, like, what is the value of this webhook? It's not just developers want this like quick summary of like, okay, why has this been added? Like, is it relevant to what I'm working on? I don't want to dig through docs or like play with this thing. And also like non-technical people are looking at our changelog as well. Like we interface with like, product managers and business people as well. These are also stakeholders we serve. It's not just developers. Right. And so we have like a little bit of flavor text explaining like, hey, this webhook gets fired when the order will be delivered later than we estimated, right? Like, should be pretty obvious from the naming of the webhook, but let's be very explicit here.
Sure.
And what can you use this for? Well, you can use it to better inform your shoppers, which is the term we use for someone buying a product from one of our developers' platforms. You can use it to better inform them and keep them in the loop about fulfillment status, because that sort of post-purchase, post-checkout experience is very important. People want to know like where their package is. Is it stuck? Is it on the way? They want this reassurance.
I
They're
know
excited
exactly
to
that
receive their
feeling.
thing, right?
Yeah.
We've all been there, and so this extends to everything we do. We want to be constantly talking to people about our developers and other stakeholders, like what awesome things are we enabling you to do?
Right.
And we want people to sort of, read our changelog or read communications from us in general and like come away with the sense that like, wow, these people at Rye are working so hard for me.
Right. They're
And
working to give us value, right?
yeah, and they really care about my success. And if it's something like a customer support request, like I want them to come away with the sense that like I am Rye's most important customer. Like I've worked with some amazing vendors, like Hypertune is one that I've worked with, where I come away with this feeling that I'm their most important customer every time I deal with them. They're our feature flagging solution. I've had less optimal interactions with vendors where I've come away thinking like, oh, these guys don't really care. I'm just another, entry in their CRM. And like Rye is at a sort of stage where like we can have this very like high touch sort of white glove approach to a lot of our developers, and like culturally we're building an organization that like really cares about communication, like thinking holistically about what we're doing. Something unique about Rye is like we don't hire product managers.
Interesting. Okay.
We're an engineering led company, and something that we screen for when we hire for developers is like, yeah, sure, we're a technical company, we're an API company, we move a lot of GMV, like tens of millions of dollars, and we do hundreds of thousands of orders every month, and it's growing at a sort of exponential rate. So there are hard scaling challenges and like system design things to solve for, like a lot of very interesting failure modes, because one of the things we support is a Rye cart can check out products from multiple stores in one go. And okay, what happens if checking out the product from store A succeeds, but then product B, store B's product you're purchasing went out of stock between the cart being created and checking out? Like,
I don't
how do you
even
handle
want to
that
think
partial
about that problem.
failure?
That's
So, very hard engineering problems.
yeah.
A lot of depth here, but like, we're not looking for like hardcore, like nerdy, sit down, write code all day, and this is all I care about style engineers. Like we're screening for like a bend towards thinking about the product holistically, and like how do we design things to provide value to developers, because you can write sort of the most elegant code in the world, or you can build like the most complicated and interesting system technically that you want. You can do event sourcing and all these cool things. But if you're not shipping something that's actually useful for the person on the other end of the product, it's all a waste, right? At the end of the day, like the technology is cool and it's fun and it's interesting, and it's why a lot of us like got into this field in the first place.
Right.
But our goal ultimately is like we need to produce something that is valuable for another human being. So yeah, this permeates very deeply in our engineering team and sort of the culture that we're trying to build. We're very concerned with things like how we communicate to developers, and how do we think about the projects we're building.
Right. That concept of like I I feel like it's not said enough in general, but like I think for most people it comes just with like experience where like I'm working at a company, I understand the company needs to be shipping value to customers. That's how the customers end up paying us. That's how we're able to keep our jobs and grow the company. But I think for a lot of people, especially more junior people, and I don't mean to pick on junior people, it
Mm.
just I don't think a lot of them have yet had sort of this learned experience where, especially if, again, some bias here and some generalization, but like especially if you've gone through school and you or boot camps and you focused on like computer science concepts and here's how you go write, like this is like
Mhm.
ideal code to go structure. You get into work and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go apply these things that I just spent all this time learning. And then you see the code base and you go, like, oh no, this isn't perfect. And then now
Mhm.
your brain is like, okay, I'm going to make sure as I go forward I'm writing the most perfect code, and like this just becomes this thing we focus on. But I'm not saying go write bad code, but what I am saying is, like, at the end of the day you have to be shipping value or else
Mhm.
you don't have a business, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Nobody gets their paycheck, and everybody goes hungry. Yeah, I think like something else that's like kind of challenging for junior engineers actually is like it's like really hard to be a software engineer. Um, like it's really hard. There's like so much depth to what we do, and like there's so much content. Like I'm pretty deep into this stuff now, and like I'm still learning new things, and like your first year or two, like okay, you're fresh out of university and you're getting into it. Um, and honestly, like the things you work on in industry are not perfectly aligned with the things that you've learned at university. Like my
Right.
alma mater did not teach how to use Git, right? I learned that because I, had some internships and like I'd worked on, personal projects like for, basically my whole life, like
Mhm.
since early high school. But like I have hired junior engineers where they get in and like they're fresh out of school and maybe they didn't do internships, so their internships weren't like at tech companies. It was like some random business that needed someone to like build a set of scripts for them,
Sure.
and they don't have these fundamentals like how to use Git or they don't have a lot of like this sort of they don't have like a lot of the muscle memory that we take for granted as like senior plus engineers when writing code. And so it's like really hard as a junior because you're simultaneously trying to develop that baseline technical competency so that it kind of largely is internalized and
Mhm.
is a background concern you're not thinking about so consciously. But then you also need to sort of grow and understand that, like, this thing that you're sort of banging your head against the wall against, 8 hours a day, like learning these technical skills, like they're not the be all and end all, and there are these soft skills and like more sort of holistic, product oriented and business oriented thinking that you also need to learn. So like it's hard for juniors. Like there's
Yeah.
a lot to cover in a very short period of time to get to the intermediate level. So I have a lot of empathy for people entering our field, especially people coming from like unorthodox backgrounds where
Sure.
like they didn't have that nice happy path of like okay, I have like all the schooling and I've got these internships and now I'm like
The
reasonable
whole
and I
thing is
did a bunch of
structured.
side projects. Yeah, yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, and then at least my experience, because even with internships and stuff like that, something that I don't think we talk about a lot is like the domain that you could be working in could
Mhm.
be completely out of left
Mhm.
field compared to anything you've thought of. Like I've had I've worked for bank machine companies like making ATM software. I've worked at a company that made needleless injectors for farm animals to help immunize them. Like that's a totally random thing.
Mhm.
At
Ah.
no point in my life was I like I plan on helping medicate farm animals as a software engineer. Like it's not a thing that came up. So the amount of learning and like just sort of newness that you're exposed to is
Mm.
like is pretty ridiculous as a new like software engineer. So
Yeah,
a lot of
totally.
empathy. And I see one of the notes that you kind of left for discussion. I don't think we've touched on yet, but I think it's interesting. So this idea of individuals that have like a concept of like internal developer experience versus external, and I think we touched on it a little bit, and maybe in terms of like what things people might focus on. But maybe from your experience, like how has this like kind of shown up where people have maybe different framing, or they might be focused on, I don't want to say like the wrong things, but maybe they're not prioritizing things that
Mm.
you think are most effective.
Yeah, I'm kind of building like increasing conviction on this. So like I have had conversations with like people on my team or like outside of my team and adjacent teams like my entire career where people have said like where folks are complaining that like, oh, this code isn't very good, it's hard to work with, it's
Hmm.
spaghetti. And we all kind of, nod our heads and agree because I mean, I have yet to work in a code base that's like totally pristine, right? There's always issues.
Even when people
Um,
rewrite it, like after like the first week, it's already back to spaghetti. Like I don't care who you are.
yeah.
That's what happens. So
Yeah, it's the natural state of things. And like, like optimistically, like I think, part of that is just like, if you're a successful company, like your engineering standards should be raising over time, right?
sure.
Like you're at a higher scale and now there are more concerns you need to deal with, or you have more edge cases you need to consider because there's this 0.5% of the market is now a substantial source of revenue. And maybe it wasn't important a year ago, but now it is. So
Mhm.
I think optimistically, it's a good sign if you have technical debt. It's if I think if you have no technical debt, you're probably not successful. If you have technical debt, you might be successful. So
At
it's
least
it's
the
some good
software has
signal.
existed long enough and it's been
Exactly,
sustained long enough that it could have technical debt, right? So
exactly, yeah. But something that I observed was like. People would complain about the code they're working on, and like, we want to make it better, and all these kind of things. When we had to interface with these adjacent teams that I had had these sort of passionate discussions about developer experience with, they put a lot more concern into like their side of the of their side of the project, right? So like
okay.
their internal implementation of the thing that like fires us a webhook, or their internal implementation of the API endpoint felt higher quality than the interface that they were shipping to us. Like there was a lot of coupling to the database, for instance, because it was easier to do that rather than introduce like some abstraction.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, and I think like part of this is like like you ship your org chart, right? Like and people are you're always going to have silos like to some extent, and people are motivated by their performance review cycle, and they just
Yeah.
need to ship it, and like they can say like, okay, I did my job, and like I threw this API endpoint over at these guys, and like they dropped the ball.
Right.
So I think there's some like tribalism there, but like also I just think like if you're building an API for another team at your company, like you are not generally going to be the person integrating with that API. And so you don't feel the pain or the joy of integrating with that, of using that API endpoint. Like you don't have that personal experience. You just experience like building the thing.
Right.
And so you're going to optimize generally, unless you're like very intentional here, like you're going to optimize for the joy of building the thing. And
Hmm.
sometimes that means taking shortcuts, which have downstream impacts. And so this is something that like we're kind of careful about at Riot, because yes, we care about our internal code base quality because we have very complicated failure modes that we need to be able to understand and reason about.
Hmm.
But also like we don't want to be taking shortcuts when we're building an API endpoint, or building a feature that we're shipping to our developers. And sort of the way I think about this, like I don't know if this is a term that's sort of widely used, but like the way I describe it is like we want to be writing in sort of like a caller oriented fashion.
Right. Okay.
And I think this is like generally true in engineering. So even if you don't have this external sort of developer working with your API, or you're not interfacing with another team, if you're just building a function to be used like internally to your
Hmm.
team, you have one implementation of that function, and you have at least one caller of it. Generally, you have more. In general, it probably makes sense to optimize for the call site rather than the implementation, because the call site is more frequently occurring in your code base.
Right. There are more instances of those call sites generally. Like you said, like at minimum, it's like a one-to-one, but
Yep.
more likely it's
It's
more
one to
call
many,
sites.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So so this is the intuition that I'm trying to test for in engineers at Rye. Like, do you have a systematic understanding of this, and like an understanding that like this is true within our code base, within the things like we're working on day to day, but it's also true with our developers. Like, we have one product by ID endpoint. We have many developers who all have like unique integrations, like calling this endpoint.
Yeah.
And so if we can, make our internal implementation 10% more complicated and end up shipping like a 1% better API endpoint, like whether that's like we can reduce latency, or we can capture the semantics of the domain better, or give us more affordances for evolution down the line, whatever it might be, that trade-off probably makes sense. It probably makes sense to take on that 10% extra complexity in service of shipping like that 1% better endpoint. And honestly, like the break-even point here is probably much higher than 10 to 1. Like, we have more than 10 people using this endpoint. And so this is kind of like the general sort of mindset that we're looking for. And my experience is that like most engineers understand this implicitly, even if they can't sort of give voice to it when they're talking about like a code base they own end to end.
Sure.
But once you get to the boundary, and once you don't have that personal lived experience of like integrating with the thing, that understanding kind of like gets a bit foggy. Something else we are doing increasingly now is like, for a long time we didn't use our own API. So like our developer console, for instance, has like an order details page, which like uses some private endpoints we built, kind of like almost like backend for front end style. And so we're incrementally shifting these things away, and like we're consuming our own API in our developer console so that we have that feedback loop of like, hey, this feels really bad. Like, it's super hard building this page. Like, did we mess up when we designed this thing?
Yeah, because if it's hard for you guys, like you can only imagine that, like, yeah, the customers are going to be like, well, I'm not touching that.
Yeah, we built the thing. We're experts, right? Like, if it's hard for us, then God only knows how someone else is supposed to do it. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So this is, yeah, we're looking for an understanding of like this caller oriented design concept, because there's always at least a 1-to-1 ratio between callers and implementations, and generally speaking, it's actually like n to 1. You have more than just a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that sort of the explanation around the priority given a ratio like that, right? I thought something else that was interesting, back to what you had said earlier about if you don't have product managers that are kind of acting as that user proxy to, I don't want to say enforce, that's too strong of a word, but kind of propagate that sort of understanding across teams, like making sure that when you're hiring people on, that they will embody that they understand that, because they kind of need to have that representation for themselves in their work. So definitely makes sense. I think that's super cool. So yeah, Sophia, I wanted to say thank you so much. I wanted to double check. I can ask for links and stuff from you after, but if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to check out what you guys are doing, like where's the best spot for people to head to?
Yeah, sure. So I work at rye.com. 3-letter domain. It's very cool. And then outside of work, I write a blog, sophiabits.com. Little inactive in the past month or two, but I'm getting back into it. There's a lot of content around, API design, especially in GraphQL, engineering leadership, and AI, of course. Everybody's writing about this now.
That's right. No, that's awesome. And like I said, I'll make sure I have links and stuff that I can post with the video. So I want to say thanks again. This was super cool. I love hearing about this kind of thing because it's different perspective. I get to learn a lot. I imagine that anyone who's listening and watching will get to learn a lot as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Of course. Thanks.